Put it on the seminary page too. Catch a few more people. Okay. Go for it. Sorry for the wait. Om Mangalam Gurudevaya Devya Matriksha Mangalam Mangalam Bhakta Brindebhyo Sarva Lokaya Mangalam Om Stapakaya Dharmasya Sarva Dharma Sarupine Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishna Te Namaha Om Sadashiva Samarambam Shankarachara Majmamashmarachara Prayantam Bande Gurum Paramparam Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwara Guru Deva Param Brahman Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Ganesha Sharada Guru Bhyo Namaha Hari Om Tat Sat Jai Ma. So we'll continue in our discussion on the Kālī Sahasranāma, the 1,000 names of Kālī, which is, I think, has been for me been a very enjoyable meditation, because every verse, every name, every cluster of names is a whole other topic that we can discuss. Every aspect of Ma, every corner of Ma's nature being revealed. Last week, we have a talk last week? I think so. Last week, we did verse 30 of the Sahasranāma. And Śuddhā Saraswati Mattangi Vijaya Jaya Nadi Sindhu Sarvamayi Tara Sunya Nivashini. And I think last week we started with, the week before we did Matangi, Saraswati Matangi, which was so fascinating. And then we did last week Vijaya, primarily Vijaya and Jaya. And of course we talked that these are classically the gatekeepers of Lord Vishnu's kingdom. We told some of their stories as revealed in the Puranas. But then we showed that actually these two names are not actually Jaya and Vijaya in the normal sense. The Jaya and Vijaya, these are Devi's attendants. And we talked about there's not so many forms that have them in popular iconography, but Chinnamasta still has. And so they're the attendants, doorkeepers or attendants in this sense. And in the cluster names, we tried to show that we're justified to interpret this cluster of names by the names that they're associated with. That this is also referring, or maybe referring to Ida and Pingala, and then the following names, actually Nadi Sindhu, rivers, streams, and ocean. The stream and ocean could then refer to Jaya and Vijaya, Ida and Pingala, and the Shushumna be the Nadi Sindhu. We talked about that. Then the Sunya, she who dwells in the void beyond mind and thought, like that. But we gave, so that interpretation, the next verses, in the next verse, the next cluster of names, one of the names is, what we'll come to is, it actually stands out a little strangely in this group, Lakini. And Lakini is a form of the goddess that exists within one of the chakras. We'll get there. So actually, and then in the next 2-3 verses, other goddesses that exist in the different chakras will be mentioned, right? So once again, this interpretation of Jaya and Vijaya as Ida and Pingala, as Nadi Sindhu, not being general rivers and general oceans, but to be the Shushumna, is again reinforced by these names literally saying, she who dwells in Muladhara, she who dwells in Swadhisthana, she who dwells in Anahata, which will be described. So this first name, I think everybody has, or most people have. If not, you want the sheet? Another sheet here. You have this one in the back. Yeah, I only printed 10. You can send one in the back if you want. I'll chant this verse. Śuddhā Taraṇginī Medhā Lakini bahu-rūpiṇī sthūlā sūkṣmā-tarā bhagavatyanurāgiṇī. Right. So the first name is Śuddhā, and so we've mentioned again and again, because every week we come to these names. Some names are describing literally just names of classical names of Kālī. Some of them are describing her iconography, classical symbols of Kālī, like she who holds a sword, she who has a garland of heads, things like she who dwells in the cremation ground. Some of the names are different goddesses, like Saraswati and Ganga, and also of other classes of deities, like Apsaras and Nagas and all these type of things. And so also showing that all the different goddesses are part of the Mahadevi, the great goddess, which is one of the themes of the Kālī Sahasranāma, that there is one great goddess. Even the names and qualities and personalities of the other goddesses are actually her forms. That's one thing. Like, for instance, this Lakini I mentioned is one of her. It's her. She exists in Muladhara. She exists in Swadhisthana, like that. And so here, Śuddhā, and some of these names are just divine qualities. Like Śuddhā means what? Purity. So she's purity. So you can say, oh, she's purity. You can say, oh, she's pure. We've also mentioned this as like when they're describing Ma, she's pure. But in a slightly more non-dualistic, she's purity itself, right? When we attribute the quality to a person containing the quality, and we say she's pure, but she's actually purity. It's not only say, oh, she's the most pure, sattva something. She's the most of all pure beings. She's the most pure. We can say like that. She's definitely the purest of all beings, but she's purity in all beings. She's purity everywhere it's found. So that's a simple meaning of Śuddhā, right? She's purity, but Śuddhā comes right after Sunya Nivasini, she who dwells in the void. Right, and right after Sarvamayi, she who is everywhere, right, and then the previous name, she who is the stream or vein, that and the ocean, right, and we interpret again this Kundalini symbolism, or the Sushumna coming to the Sahasranāma, the oceanic consciousness, the oceanic expansion of consciousness, right. But that expansion of consciousness it's not really big. It's shunya. It's so big that it transcends the time, space, causation, and distinction. So it becomes the same as being empty or nothing and void, like that. So it becomes, because Śuddhā comes right after that. It may be, and I think it's fair to assume this in this cluster of names. It's referring again to the nature of the pure consciousness that's experienced at Sahasrāma, at the thousand petal, at the culmination of the yogic ascent, Kundalini ascent. She is in the pit of Kundalini. She's Shakti, but she's also Shakti fully liberated, fully in her purest form, you could say. So by saying Śuddhā, pure, everything, it's describing the infinite consciousness experienced by yogis, or described by yogis when using Kundalini symbolism as the infinite consciousness, or non-consciousness as a void, or the all. It's interesting that one name, Sarvamayi, she was everything, and then Sunya Nivasini, she was nothing. Right? They both can be described. That experience can be described as anything. So I'm remembering just now on Sri Ramakrishna's deathbed. Swami Vivekananda, the young Naren, at that time he came back from Bodh Gaya, and he was extremely inspired by Buddhism. As we know, he loved the Buddha. And so because he came back from Bodh Gaya, people began to discuss Buddhism. We know Sri Ramakrishna practiced all the different religions. There's no evidence of him practicing Buddhism. He made a few comments because Buddhism was no longer an extant religion. There was like 1% Buddhists in India, before the Tibetans came, the Tibetan diaspora came into India, is less than 1%. Although at one time it was like 70%, and Bengal was almost entirely Buddhist at one time. It was extremely, but by the time Sri Ramakrishna it's no longer. So it's not that he practiced Buddhism, that he practiced the religions as what we know that were available to him or that were exposed to him. But in this case, they began an argument. Oh, some say Buddha is an atheist, or we're theists and he's an atheist, something like that. The Hindu compared, and of course that's perhaps an oversimplification of it. A more philosophically controversial and challenging statement is not that Buddhism is non-theistic or atheist and we're theists or hyper-theists or polytheists, whatever Hinduism is. It's really a better, I think the background, what they're really discussing in that wording of it in casual conversation is self and not self, is or isn't, right? Is there an existing continuing self, or is there not? That's really the argument. And so Sri Ramakrishna, rather than going into are they atheists or not, or what are they, whether or not they're right on their view of the Atman doctrine or Anatman doctrine, right? He said, oh no, when Brahman is experienced, I have to get this right. It can be described as ashti and nashti, or nashti. Ashti means exists, or nashti, isn't. Right? So these are two ways of experience. Maybe two ways of experiencing it, or two ways of describing the same experience that we have to be careful, because this is beyond our the ability to discuss, but also beyond our experience to discuss. Right? We're only taking from what. But he made this statement that it's the same, that they can be the same experience, or that the culminating experience can be then turned around and described in two very different ways. Even in the previous verse, two names, Sarvamai, she was everything and everywhere, right? Another one said actually she exists in nothing, in emptiness, in voidness. Maybe the same thing. So here, Śuddhā, I believe, is described another quality of that ultimate experience, the purest, pristine experience of that can be described as void or as all, right? Swami Chaitananda, in a very conversational way, he made a statement that if you go out in the boat in the ocean, and you look up and go this the infinite sky, or you look down and look the infinite ocean. So one saying it's everything, other saying it's empty. One saying it's full. It's full and empty may not be that different. Of course, we can double down and make an argument. The problem is that you push the other person's argument far enough. Each argument really, I think, expertly collapses the other person. They're both equally at the higher level, subtle levels. They both win. So I don't like to argue too much not self doctrine, because there's really not that. They can dare to say that one doesn't win easily. Right. Maybe because the experience can be described both ways. These are legitimate experiences, and perhaps this is how Thakur, Sri Ramakrishna described it. Śuddhā. So she who is purity, or she who is pure, she who is purity, or that purity is that quality of that consciousness described at that peak experience. This example, this map. The other day, yesterday morning, our morning coffee, our coffee talks, or some people are going to call them frothy talk. When you we get caffeinated in the morning, start philosophizing and theologizing, practice to get our mind a little sharp. But we're thinking like also this interpretation. I have to justify my hermeneutical stance in interpreting, because that's just a list of names. This may not mean at all. It's just their names, and I'm not writing, and there's no existing commentary in English that I know of the Kālī Sahasranāma, right? So we can look at what other people have said. But I know enough of the text. The very first day we gave the very first talk years ago, I think 5 or 6 years ago, on the Kālī Sahasranāma, we mentioned the source of the text has within it folded the three main schools of Tantra, right? It has the Dakshina Marg, the Vama Marg, and the Kaula Marg. Right, and it assumes you have to have knowledge of all three to make sense of the names, right? And especially the Kaula Marg part of it, is fully proficient and you're already using the symbolism or the language of the chakras and the nadis, and it's going to use that language. They use that language a lot. So the fact that we can read into it, maybe this name has nothing to do with the original author. Didn't mean this at all. But whoever we have a traditional author. This is these originally coming from Dattatreya through Parshuram. There's a whole, I forget exactly, after all this 10 years of talking on this text, I forget who wrote it. Who the original author is. I have to go back to the Purana where it comes from to remember. But it's very likely that whoever the mythological or ancient or mystical or divine author or a more earthy scribe who put the text together, whoever it was, had knowledge. I believe that they purposely did this because of the way the names are put together, and we know that they had this background, this particular school of Tantra and yogic practices is throughout the text. Some places it's really obvious, like in the next 3-4 verses, it's going to be really obvious. It's going to be he who's Lakini, he who's Lakini, who is Shakti, all the different deities in the chakra. It's immediately assuming already a very developed chakra knowledge, right? Interesting, if we get a little bit controversial, is that means the text is not really that old. Because the chakra knowledge as we think of it now is not that old. There's evidence even in ancient texts. Already the ideas were there, but to develop when you have like a certain deity who has a certain mount and a certain attendant deities, that's already, those develop a little bit late and more controversially, but anyways, I'm not going to use that to date. Or also, if this text was written yesterday, I think it's still supreme. Ancientness is not the proof of authentic. The Tantras don't claim to be ancient. The Tantras claim to be contemporary. They came the last couple hundred years, some of them, right? The last 1,000 years, last 500 years. They're texts they're a new revelation in this age of Kali Yuga. So that's the thing. The Vedas claim to be eternal, really old. The Puranas means old and long, right? They're old histories, right? If they're not that old, they lose their authenticity if they get dated too early, right? But the Tantras are, by not being old, by Vedic standards, does not weaken them. They're claimed to be fairly recent texts for this age, a new revelation of Kali Yuga. So anyway, this is a different issue. Śuddhā. Oh, as I was saying, so using this idea of the chakras and in relating to Kālī and the three different margs that go to interpret this text, go to inform this text. Śuddhā also, the tantric background of the yogic idea of the chakras, part of the idea is that the entire world of name and form springs from the one, right? There's one, we've talked about this many times, but I need to establish it to keep the names going. If you can imagine, you literally can't imagine, but let's imagine there's the static ground, unchanging existence of consciousness. But that consciousness requires something to be conscious of in order to be called consciousness, right? So we mentioned many times the one becomes automatically two because consciousness has something to be conscious. So that's prakāsha and vimarsha, the awareness and that which it reflects upon, but there's nothing else but itself, so it takes both forms. And then two becomes automatically three, that means consciousness, the thing that it reflects upon, and then the active reflection. So then you have the bindu, the split seed of Shiva Shakti, right? Another great symbol. The seed, the drop is the one thing, the seed, which is two, and then you have the triangle. Already you have the three, and then those triangles go to expand. So that's one. So in a certain sense, and one of the ways this can be interpreted, and this is the way we've approached this particular time going through the text. Even Ma represents this. Shiva is that infinite consciousness, right? That one becomes, in order to express and to know itself, becomes two, Shiva and Shakti, right? The two then becomes many, become three, and they become three, symbolized by the letter Om, then the different letters of the alphabet that are represented by her mundamala, her garland of heads, and then that becomes the entire world of multiplicity, the world of duality, the polarity and everything in between, every nature of expression. So still you have the Śuddhā. So from the pure Śuddhā, the pure, actually in Tantra it says Śuddhā sattva. It's not sattva. Sattva is material quality. Śuddhā sattva is the quality of Brahman. Right? Thakur used that language also. Sattva is one of the three gunas. That's already in material. It's a material, it's a peaceful, pure, clean, at rest, those nourishing, gentle quality compared to other qualities, but still a material quality.
Physical reality, like all spatika?
Yep. So spatika is a perfect, actually, in some previous verses.
Sattvic?
Yeah, spatika is sattvic, but it's a symbol of the Śuddhā sattva, that which is beyond. It's so transparent that the original light shines through. You know, of course, through a crystal, it's no longer pure. It's even through a crystal. We see through, what is it, that line? We see through a light, a glass darkly, St. Paul writes. It's a one of my great line. We see the light, but through a glass darkly, right? So some glasses are not as dark, right? So crystal is a very pure thing. So, and we, in our talks on Saraswati in the previous weeks, we shared like that. But still, when you're looking at through a crystal, right? What are you seeing? It's a crystal is in the symbol of the pure. It's the symbol of like it's as if it's the closest you can be to not being there. Clear glass. It's still there though. But so Shuddha Sattva is the pure of the pure. Talk word sometime in his language. The purest of the pure. Purity purity itself, right? So from that purity itself, there seems to be some. If that's pure, then what's pure? Okay, this is not pure water. It's very tasty tea with about 50 different things in it. But imagine this was pure water, right? What makes, if this is dirty water, what is it? That means that there's water plus something, right? The water itself is pure, but then dirty water is actually pure water with stuff in it, right? So the problem in when she's sarvamai, and she's everything, when there's one thing is pure, and there's a second thing, we could say, is that impure? It's not exactly impure. It's almost like another example Sri Ramakrishna gave is like water that's frozen. You have a piece of ice floating in water. It's like, well, now there's something in it. It's not clean, but it's only water. It's still only water, right? So even the sense of duality within the one, within the pure, it's not impure, but in the language of that language, there's now an impurity in it. There's something in the one, and that keeps going. Right, expanding through ripples and through interactions, and pretty soon you have a masala chai with about 50 different things in it, which I'm going to sip to get my enough energy to keep going. I started at a high pitch. I don't know if I can keep this up. I usually warm up more. When you start talking at like Śuddhā, the one becoming two, becoming three. We're starting at 11. So another way that Tantra often uses it, describes it, and Shakti uses it, is that within the one pure existence, as if, or maybe actually, there seems to be a vibration, some movement, and Tantra uses a spanda, a pulse, right, a bija, right? That's the dot, the yantra, that's a dot over the om. From that, seemingly it becomes externalized and manifest from the infinitely subtle to the subtle to grosser and grosser and grosser and grosser forms until we end up with this glorious and messy world of name, form, and objects and the full thing, right? So in one sense, in that description, right, this world is impure, but not because it's not impure. I'm not saying, there's an impure world, right? But using this language is a Shuddha Sattva, and now this is with full gunas. Now we have material qualities and manifestations like that. In that sense, Śuddhā, because the next name, if you look, is Taraṇginī. Taraṇginī, sorry, not Taraṇginī. There's a tara in the last verse is the word tara. So I've been trying to get my tongue to obey it, to obey me. So Taraṇginī, taranga, let's look at the word taranga first, right? Taranga is a quality, a guna that you'd attribute to like a river, right? And it's like waves or bubbles or ripples, something like that, something that moves to and fro, right? Maybe even, I'm not sure if like tandava for that dance, I'm not sure if the word for dance even, I'm not sure. But taranga is to not to flow, to vibrate, to ripple, to froth, to bubble over. She gave in another translation, an old Bengali book, it says a very colorful translation. She says, "The supreme spirit of life flow, bubbling with cosmic potential energy." But that's kind of the idea. I mean, it's a little flower, but that's really, it's like, because what it like bubbling was the eternal spirit bubbling with potential life energy, from Śuddhā to Ashut. I mean, from unmanifest, from beyond unmanifest, beyond even the idea of manifest, to become subtle before it becomes gross, is that first vibration, bubbling, rippling, some stirring, however you want to think of, or coagulating, or however, these are all just mental images, how the one can be, because the problem is, and this is a existential philosophical problem, maybe not for you guys, but for a lot of people who stay up late, like, how can there be anything? Like not only that, how is there everything? How can there be even anything? Because like, what was there before there was anything or everything? What was there? There was nothing, by definition, right? So it's like from nothing to everything or anything, from nothing to something to anything to everything, right? Every philosophical system has to come up with theological system, mythological system has to come up with some version, some way to describe, so like in the beginning there was nothing and then there was something, like God spoke and there was, out of nothing came something, with all kinds of different answers, so I believe this is a tantric and Shakta oriented way of understanding how the nothing, who is actually one thing, became everything, many things, but they're actually one thing, right? The one thing at one time was nothing because there was no things, and now it's everything, but there's only one thing. So this is my Advaita, Shakta Advaita theory, right? Taraṇginī. So Taranga. Taraṇginī, right? And it has a nice sound to it, right? That this is so another good word is tide. I like that there's a flow, an ebb, what's the tide? An ebb and flow, right? So that the one is expanding. So this is another idea, but if you take Taranga, it used to be a bubbling or a flow, a vibration or a pulse or something like that. Here, to the idea of ebb and flow, that means it expands and contracts, right? From that ocean, the previous name is Nadi Sindhu, right? This ocean, cosmic ocean, that's experienced as the void or the all, right? This cosmic, from that one, it seems to flow out and then flow back in, to flow out and flow back in. So this is how there's one thing, how the nothing becomes one thing, becomes everything, how the everything becomes one thing, becomes nothing. This is how the whole flow. And the reason, this is long-winded description, but that is, this is the background theological view or background for the chakra understanding, which these names seem to be implying. So we have to talk a little bit about it, because the one comes out, right? From Shiva becomes Kālī and manifest, or from the Śuddhā sattva, the pure unmanifested being, seems to become manifest, and then steps seemingly, maybe not actually, steps down from infinite to seemingly finite, to more finite, more distinct, to more finite, to more distinct, until we have very finite, right? Which is our experience of things and people and states and worlds and thoughts, right? Of course, we're learning that even the things we think are very finite may not be finite things at all, right? And new philosophical systems are challenging that, and of course, new scientific theories and physics theories are challenging this also. Right, that what we think is finite really isn't finite at all. But experience, that's I think is very important. That whatever it actually is, experientially, we go from infinite consciousness, or non-dual awareness, or universal awareness, sarvamaya, or sunya-vasani, to sūkṣmā-tarā, to conscious, to seemingly limiting our consciousness until we are conscious of. We're conscious of limited beings, experiencing a limited world full of other limited things, objects, and beings. Right, and so that is understood, mapped. Whether it literally is this or not, I don't know. It's mapped by yogis as seen as the different chakras stepping down through the tattvas, through the Maha Tattva and Ahamkara, like the manas, to finally to the actual elements of akasha, space, then what are we? Space, air, fire, water. Yeah. I usually go in my mind. I usually go the other way. I'm trying to go the other way right now, so I don't even like to say it that way, just in case it gets me a little more trapped, Right. So that's how we usually think of the chakras, as they've been identified. Originally, they probably weren't seen this way, but they've been identified with the elements and the stepping down of consciousness, of energy and awareness, like this, right? And so then, now where are we now? We have that infinite consciousness seemingly trapped in physical consciousness, earth element, right? Or in the map of the Kundalini system, in the chakra system, as Muladhara, right? In the root, right? So we're trapped in matter, trapped in body consciousness or physical awareness, external physical and objectified awareness, right? So then the reverse thing is to go from body, so the most concrete and condensed type of awareness, to a more liberated awareness, freer awareness. So from earth, you think of it, go back, let's do the list back down. Infinite consciousness. So if we give it a form that's not really a form, we can space. This is akasha, right? It's not really something, but you can describe it, although it's not really, you can't really describe it, it's describing it. If you take space and then try to make it more physical, more distinct, well, like air, you feel, it's like space that you can feel. Of course, these are not scientific descriptions, right? These are experiential descriptions and symbolic descriptions, right? And you take air and you condense it more, it heats up, becomes fire, right? Fire, this is the way it's conceptualized. If you condense it, and it has a you cool it down, and therefore it has a it condenses and becomes I lost the word, but it becomes water. I forget, there's a word I'm missing right now I haven't thought of it in a long time. Water. You take water and you slow it down, it becomes ice. So it's like tighter, more seemingly more and more trapped, right? Now, so the way back up is through then to water, which is more moving, to fire, which is more dynamic, to air, which is and to finally to the higher and higher states at 1,000. So we can trace, just like the Ma herself as Taraṇginī, right? As Śuddhā Taraṇginī is from infinite pure ocean of consciousness or of awareness comes, waves come out as creation, and then waves come back in, right? And so experientially, personally, as an individual, we also get trapped, and we go back up, right? Or we say we because this is our experience, right? She gets trapped and comes back up, right? Because she's the one playing all these parts. It's her that's all the stages, right? But at a certain stage, she's us. She becomes all these different parts. Śuddhā Taraṇginī, then Medhā. So we know this name, right? We haven't. We know there's a sage by that name in the Chandi, right? The sage that Samadhi and Surata go, and they're in struggle. They go to this ashram of the sage Medhā in the jungle, and Medhā means like a subtle spiritual intelligence, right? And so one of Saraswati's name is Medhā. There's a famous verse in the Veda, the Vedic stotram called Medhā, the Medhā stotram, which is considered for Saraswati. We use it in worshiping of Saraswati. Very sublime. And Medhā is actually whenever anybody talks about Medhā, there's certain things you have to say. This is one of the things you have to say, right? When you chant the Gayatri mantra, right? Yo na prachodayat, right? May that light of light, external as a sun, internal as a self, may that shines with divinity. May it illuminate my mind, right? May illuminate my intellect. That illuminate my intellect is always connected to what you're praying for is Medhā, right? It's for this subtle illumined intellect. And that subtle illumined intellect can understand spiritual topics, because it's hard. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it's getting harder as I get older. It's harder even to understand basic how remote control works. I've lost my operational knowledge of simple things like this, But what to speak, so even growth things are harder to think about. But subtle things, if we lose, we need a certain type of intelligence to understand, focused intelligence, a purified intelligence, and disciplined intelligence, that we can understand spiritual topics, right? And that's why these two characters in the Chandi, Surata and Samadhi, both representing their own. Of course, they're also very symbolic names of Dharma and Samadhi, spiritual. But they lose their condition. They lose their sense of self. They lose their kingdom. They lose their family. Everything goes against them. And then, not knowing what to do, they go into the forest. Like we all, we may go on retreat, and we get a little off balance. We go into retreat, or we go to a temple, or minimum we go into our room for meditation. We at least close our eyes or something. You need to go and you need to invest. You need to ask a sage. And Medhas, of course, there's some great sages. You can hopefully go ask such a great sage. We're lucky we have some such sages that we've been able to meet. But in the story, Medhas, by his name, just means intelligence. So they ask, in a certain sense, they go within and find out the answer. Why is it, when they ask, why is it that I'm attached to those things that cause me suffering? Right? If we ask ourselves why, it's like, oh, the very things that cause me suffering, or the very people that take away my freedom, why I attach to them. You don't have to ask your friend. You can ask yourself and come up with a good answer to that. All of us know why. It's the problem. It's way easier to ask somebody else because it's embarrassing to ask yourself because the answer is so obvious. And the answer, Medhā gives it pretty obvious, but it's not just an embarrassing answer, right? It's how to get out of it. So we can ask our subtle intelligence, and we can pray for subtle intelligence, right? So other way to think of Medhā is like we maybe, of course, we've argued because in English these words have. In English we have certain words like wisdom compared to knowledge or something. Not Medhā is knowledge, Medhā is wisdom, and so wisdom. People like wisdom means this and knowledge is higher, or knowledge is this and wisdom is higher. Depends on how we use them. These words aren't exactly defined in the way we usually speak, but in my mind we consider like wisdom, or realize intimate knowledge, realized knowledge. It also has like prudence, talent, intelligence, mental vigor, and like a vigorous mind. So if she's Medhā, that means she's that divine higher intelligence that we all have, or that we're all praying for. That's okay. But let's connect it to Śuddhā and Taraṇginī, right? Medhā. So it's like this is how the one flows out, right? It's one of the ways she flows is through. Also, Medhā, another name for Medhā, the deity of Medhā I mentioned is Saraswati, right? And Saraswati in this language, in this kind of Shaktized, yogic, tantric, kundalini type language, Saraswati is the goddess of vibration. She's Vageshwari, right? So within that one Śuddhā experience, one ground of existence or being or whatever, that vibration, right? The Lord of vibration is Vageshwara, who in popular Hinduism becomes Brahma, and his Shakti in Tantra is Vageshwari, who in popular Hinduism becomes Saraswati or Medhā, right? So this is part of the vibration is when we try to attain Medhā or pray for Medhā or like that, we're actually trying to get closer to the closer to that Śuddhā state, right? It's higher up on the evolutionary stream. So where are we? Taraṇginī, Medhā, and then Lakini. So Lakini. So now we have to take a little bit of a detour to another category of goddess, and two verses later, the other goddesses will be mentioned. And Lakini is one of the goddesses that's in the different chakras. So now you already have, as I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, this assumes a very developed tantric cosmology and psychology, right? It's already very well developed. Similar to, and actually, the Sahasranāma has a whole section, a whole bunch of names, probably 30 names or something, in the 485, something like that on. It goes into, it mentions, there's usually a cluster of 9 names each, if I remember properly, where it describes, she who dwells, I forget which one dwells in Muladhara, but she who dwells in Muladhara, she who has 4 faces, she who rides an alligator, she whose favorite food is jaggery cooked with saffron and rice, she who these type of things, she has 4, she who's surrounded by certain Shaktis, right? And then the next name, she who is this, and it's describing the deity and her qualities as understood and as she resides in each chakra. So actually, I just, in my very language, it says, as she resides in each chakra. So they're not, that just means that you're not different deities. Lakini and Dakini and Shakini, if I remember I'm trying to, maybe they all sound some like that. So maybe have, at the end of the thing, I've included the verses to remind myself, but I have to scroll on to lose my place. At the end, we can maybe mention who those goddesses are. So are they different goddesses? It could be different goddesses. We all have, in case you're wondering, we have all these little goddesses living inside of us, right? Or the way the Lalita Sahasranāma usually describes it, and the fact Lalita Sahasranāma is not the names of 1,000 different goddesses, and some of them exist in the body. It's the name of one goddess in 1,000 different forms and names. So Kālī Sahasranāma is the same way. So when dealing with Ma as Kula Kundalini, she exists in each chakra differently, and so she exists in each chakra as the different goddesses, or like one thing you could say, right now we have the different Devis, right? Or you could think that when she's in each chakra, she's known as a different Devi. Like in the Muladhara, she has 4 heads, and the second, and she's known like this. That's another way. I think that's the way I usually tend to think of it. It's not that we have to worship Lakini, Shakti in the navel. That's where she, in case you're wondering, that's where she lives. We're dealing with the navel right now. Or you can think of it is that when Prana and Kundalini, when Devi is experienced or experiences it at that level, she is known as that goddess, with that consort, with that symbolism, with these arms, that many heads, and that symbolism like that, right? So as the names go on, as we continue, we'll mention the other ones as we get to them. But since we're at Lakini, we should mention. So she resides, rules, or dwells in the Manipura chakra, which is the navel chakra, right? And so I just give you a little bit some. She has her own dhyan mantras describing her. So I just read. This is from different. This is collected from Arthur Avalon, from Sir John Woodruff, Arthur Avalon's books. He goes a lot into this. So I collected it from this. Serpent Power, Arthur Avalon. She is 4-armed, has of a radiant body, is dark, shama, right, of complexion, clothed in yellow, remnants, decked with various ornaments, and exalted with drinking of ambrosia, right? Actually, that and most of her, I think I may have written down or copied 3 dhyan mantras. I'm not sure, but there's more. You look in the different like Kālī Sahasranāma stotrams, you can look and they have their own. They're quoting other dhyan mantras from different tantras, right? All of them from roughly the same, but all of them have her drinking ambrosia, amrita, right? This is a common theme, right? But especially because she's in the body, she's in the muladhara, in the chakras, right? It's that's always interpreted, especially with like that, as drinking. What is that amrita? It's dripping from the Sahasranāma. Right, it's the amrita dripping from the 1,000 petals. There's always nectar dripping. So she's catching that and drinking it, which I think is very interesting, very, very fascinating description, right? Because wherever she is at each state, she's being nurtured by the higher, and we're called, and you see there's something to it. Like when we call up an aspiration and devotion, is also very active. The ability to call up is also a response from above. We're being called from above. We're being fed. We're being, we're getting, like we have we're very limited beings, but we have an intuition or a desire or a motivation for become more unlimited, to know the infinite, to be one with the infinite, or to love or play with the infinite like that. Although that seems to be the exact opposite of what we are, right? But we feel it because we're getting something. We're getting it from there. It's that experience, that ocean of infinite awareness, right? The Nadi Sindhu ocean of Śuddhā Sagara, the ocean of that's experienced at the top of, that is still it's radiating power, it's descending power, it's trickling power, you could say, is what's who we are, and that's animating us, and that's what's calling us. So she's also drinks this nectar. In one of her 4 hands, she holds the thunderbolt. That's common for her. In her second hand, she holds the arrow that was shot from the bow of Kama. So we have all these interesting. That's an interesting. I have to stop a little bit. This Devi holds a bow, right? But it's not just an arrow. That arrow has been shot by Kamadev, right? Kamadev is Cupid in a little bit cartoony Western. You can imagine Cupid, a little cherub, a little thing, in our paintings, right? But Cupid in Hinduism, he's not a little cherub. He's a very aggressive and very handsome young man, right? And he knows how to agitate the entire world, right? He even agitated Shiva, right? And his, you can think one of Cupid's arrows, Kamadev's arrows, Madan's arrows, even Shiva gets agitated, right? Which actually is very interesting because that symbol, we've told that story more fairly recently, that is the very vibration of infinite consciousness, which Shiva was like, where's that coming from? Like that stir of Shakti, right? So it could be that it's a stir of Shakti, or, that arrow gets shot to all of us, but she catches that arrow. She's aiming, her kama is for her Lord at the top of the head, right? She's aiming at that. She's caught Cupid's arrow, right? And so this is interesting. Kama, we mentioned kama means desire, it means lust, it also means devotion. The mantra for Krishna is kleem, right? That and the same and the mantra for Cupid is the same mantra, right? So there is a spectrum, right? There's two poles and everything in between of our desire, right? The highest aim, what we really want, is that divine experience, the unitive experience, or with the divine, right? But most of our arrows are shot outside. We're being shot by all kinds of lower things, and we get distracted, right? We're full of desire, so we're trying to satisfy desire. But our real desire, and Kundalini, the Devi, her real desire is always at the top. So even the arrows that Kamadev is shooting at her, perhaps this is the way we can think of it, she's pointing up towards her Lord, right? So it's interesting. So where is Kamadev? So she's at the third chakra. Okay, we're not talking about these in order because that's not the way the names come, right? So usually we think of our sexual desire at the second chakra. This is where the sexual organs are located, right? And so and usually that second chakra is that realm of sexual desire, right? So some have commented that it's being shot. The arrow is being shot from the second chakra at her. Okay, that's where kama, as we usually conceptualize it, comes from, right? The Muladhara, there's no kama. Is security. Psychological, be seeing security and safety and like that. But the second one is your desire awakens for stuff and people and pleasure and that type of stir, right? So it's interesting, the idea that it's shot up and she catches it, right? But also it's shot up, right? So even that desire is really aimed at. I mean, the symbolism is deep, I think, right? She has with the fourth hand, Lakini. Oh, she also holds fire, right? And that makes sense. The third chakra is the fire element, right? So she holds a cup of fire or a flame of fire, right? And the fourth hand, she forms a mudra of Varada mudra, giving blessings. Abhaya mudra, removing from fear, right? Another description on the red lotus, in the precept of the lotus, is Shakti Lakini. She is blue. Here she's blue. She has 3 faces and 3 eyes in each. Is 4-armed, and with her hand she holds the Vajra, Shakti weapon, and makes a sign of dispelling fear and granting boons. She has fierce projecting teeth and is fond of eating rice and dal, cooked and mixed with meat and blood. This is from a tantric text, right? So now you know. So this, of course, we've mentioned this is that means because this is actually, what is it that she's, if we were to give it, we could also, maybe in ancient tantric rites, she wants meat and blood, let's give her meat and blood, or like that. But actually, meat and blood is the lower, is physicality. This is meat. We're the meat, right? So at this chakra, you're already above. At this chakra, you begin. This is where you begin to transcend body consciousness, but you're still in body consciousness, right? You're still eating in the eating process. By the fourth chakra, you're no longer. Your diet has changed, right? In the Lita Sahasranāma, she says she likes sweet rice cooked with gur. So it's a different thing. So that's a different type of thing, a sattvic type of puja, right? She likes rice pudding cooked with date sugar. So it's different. We offer her rice pudding with date sugar, or our body consciousness, one of the two. Mm-hmm. Last sip. Ma. Another from a text called the Sat Chakra Nirupana. Lakini is described. The benefactress of all. She has 4 arms, her radiant body is dark, complexion similarly clothed in yellow, decked with various ornaments, drinking ambrosia, same, right? By meditating on this navel lotus, on the Nabhi Padma. So again, she's worshipped in the navel, the Nabhi Padma. The power to destroy and create worlds is acquired, right? So we have to imagine that. Vani, Saraswati, the goddess of speech, right? With all the wealth of knowledge ever abides in the lotus of the meditator's face. Because again, the previous name is Medhā, right? So it's connected to Saraswati, this divine knowledge is connected. This is perhaps a stage of awakening where we begin to pray for higher things, right? So a few other things that, I mean, if we ever get a chance in seminary talks to talk about the subtle anatomy, I have full notes from many years ago of all the intricate things of each of the chakras. Very fascinating. So in the Manipura chakra, her vehicle. Anybody know what the vehicle is?
Gali. Gali.
Which means?
In Hindi we say gali.
What?
Vehicle.
Vehicle, yeah, Gari. No, that's not the name vehicle, but whatever. She rides a ram. She rides a ram, right? And her beach mantra is Ram, because that's the mantra for fire, right? It's interesting. Ram and Ram, of course, I don't think they're related, but I think it's easy for me to remember after all these. I haven't thought about this in literally 18 years since the last time I talked on this goddess, right, at UCI. But I remember, it's easy to remember, Ram and Ram, Ram, right? And her consort is Rudra, right? So and the Rudra here, her consort, even though we meditate upon her consort, she's in union with her Shakti. I mean, she's in union with her consort, or he's in union with his Shakti. He's actually not in union with his Shakti. Brahma, Rudra is here. She's longing for union. She's still going up. And this idea and the ram in this, the Vahana symbolism, is the symbol of youth, right? And you can see this is the chakra of a young person, right? Where we've already been embodied and our physical needs are taken care of. Then there's awakening of desires and sexuality, and then there's this thing where it's fire, right? So this is our aspiration. We want to make something. We want to be successful. We want to fit in. We want to succeed. We want to go. We want to become an individual. We want those type of things. These are the things associated if you were to assign psychological tendencies to Manipura chakra, which is a fairly modern thing to do, but it can be done, has been done. So that's that stage. So she is Shakti at that stage, or life at that stage, describing her manifestation. In the Lita Sahasranāma, I mentioned that her names, if you're interested in the Lita Sahasranāma, which most people here have translations and commentaries on that, if you start at 495, and go to 503. These are the names of Lakini, her qualities. I'll just mention them. There's Manipurabhya Nilaya, she who resides in the Manipura. That makes sense, right? Vandana Traya Samyukta, she who has 3 faces. The 3 faces connected to Agni, right? Agni is a 3-faced deity in traditional thing. It's also the 3rd chakra, so it makes sense, right? Vajradika Yudhopeta, she who holds the Vajra, the Shakti lightning bolt, and other weapons. Damaryabhir Avritta, she who is surrounded by Damari and her other attendant deities. The Swadhisthana chakra has how many petals? 4, 6, 10, right? So 10. So she's surrounded by 10 deities. Each petal has its own Shakti in the symbolism. And so it just mentions the main one and the other ones. Each one of these cluster names will mention like that. Rakta Varna, she who is red in color, the color of fire and Shakti, awakening youth, right? Mamsa Nishta, she who presides over the flesh. And actually each of these, in the chakra system, each of these deities presides over a different tattva. It's one over our skin, over our flesh, over our marrow, over our blood, over our soft tissue, it's one way of understanding it. We can't go into that. It's a different topic. Gudana Pritta Manasa. And this is she who is fond of sweet rice made with gur. Right? So this is actually during Navaratri, many people, there's different ways of making sweet rice, but one is making with like this Nowadays we can find. At one time it was very hard to get gur. At Navaratri we'd expensive. Now I think Mothers sells. I think what they call date sugar or raw sugar. I forget what it is, but jaggery. They call it jaggery. Yeah, jaggery. Right. So if you want to make a pudding, rice pudding with jaggery, this will feed this chakra, the deity of that chakra. Samasta Bhakti Sukara, she who gives happiness to her devotees. I like this name, right? And then Lakini Amba Swarupini, she who is in the form of Lakini Yogini. So this is very interesting, back to our interpretation that in the Kālī Sahasranāma and each of the deities mentioned, even if they're distinct deities with their own dhyan mantras, functions, qualities, and origin stories, right? They're Devi, they're Kālī in that form. Here it says, she who's in the form of Lakini. So we can say that to use the same principle, it is Kālī who's in the form of Lakini and the other deities. So, Hari Om. How are we doing? Okay, we're doing good. So, one of my favorite names, was that the name for it? bahu-rūpiṇī. Bahu-rūpiṇī. She who has many forms. Now you could say, like Lakini and Saraswati and Yamuna and Kashi, all the different, we've mentioned so far, 337 forms up to this point, right? Or gunas and qualities. So a simple definition of this, and there's a name also in Lalita Sahasranāma verse name 824. The same name is there. It's a shared name, many shared names in Sahasranāma, bahu-rūpiṇī. So if you have a commentary on it, you can see how other people have unfolded this name. But the simple obvious meaning, we'll do an obvious meaning and not so obvious meaning. I always like the not so obvious meaning. But the obvious meaning is that she's taken many forms, like Lakini, like Saraswati, like Durga, like Narasinghi, like Varahi, all the different names we've mentioned. She has unlimited form. And so that's a very important point, is that Hinduism, although we like to give it it has a strong monistic, it's strongly monistic at its background, but it's also pantheistic, or polytheistic. There's many different forms of God. There's many different gods, different forms of God. But here already we have but they're one deity's forms. All of them are her forms, right? So this is that. So we usually describe this. We use a term as monistic. Pantheistic monism, right? Or polytheistic monism, right? Because there are many, she's bahu-rūp, she has taken so many forms, right? And not only that, not only the form of Kālī and Durga and Saraswati and Lakini and Dakini and Yakshi and Tara and Jaya and Vija, these are all her forms. She can be worshipped and seen. She has become all these forms, right? She's taken all these forms. She can be approached in these forms, worshipped in these forms. She can appear in these forms. She has these functions, right? That's an obvious meaning. That's one of the meanings of this text, right? But at the same time, they're her forms, right? There's only they're always her. All the forms are her form. So in the background, Vedanta would describe it as like it was the Ishtadevata conception, right? There's one we've given a talk on this a while back in the Kali Puja discussions on the Panchadevata Puja. Right, that they were competing in not ancient and before our time, right? There are five large. This is perhaps the way maybe it's overly simplified, probably not as exactly how it was in ancient days, but the way it's come down to is there's 5 competing sects in India: the Ganapatyas, the Sauryas, the Vaishnavas, the Shaktas, and the Shaivites. Now the Ganapatyas and the Sauryas, the worship of the sun, and Ganesha, those have been absorbed. Right, everybody worships the sun through Gayatri, and everybody worships Ganesha. So they don't have a distinct cult anymore so much. Right, there's only some texts and some hymns that we know from, but practically speaking, those lineages are not so popular. But now we have 3 major competing groups: the Shaivites, Vaishnavas, and Shaktas. Right, you all know the Shaktas are supreme. Okay, we'll start there now. But Shankaracharya, one of the things he didn't make it up. He popularized this. It's there in text that predate Shankara, of worshipping, seeing them, the 5, as faces of Brahman. So the Panchayana Puja, where you worshipped the 5, Vishnu, Surya, Ganesha, Shakti, and Shiva, you take, and usually in the form of Shalagam, a Shiva Lingam, a Banalingam, there's different symbols for each one of them, and you worship them together. And the one that you love most, you put in the center, because that's just your focus, right? But all of them are seen as faces of the one or different functionaries, how the one does different things, you know? So that was a huge revolutionary idea. And I think that's part of the background of the extreme pluralism that we attribute to Hinduism. And Hinduism, the thing that Hinduism, I think, has the greatest gift to the world is this view of the one behind the many, and truth is one, sages call up by various names, you know, that type of thing, I think. And Swami Vivekananda believed that this is the major message of Sri Ramakrishna in the dark age of quarrel, hypocrisy, and separation, right? That's a major message, and I think it's one of the great things. But it comes the idea that whoever you worship, you're actually worshiping the one. It may be the one doing a specific thing, or in a particular form, or a form that you like, or the form that came to you, or the form that's worshipped in your family, or in your culture, or in your community, right? But it's still, you can worship the one, but you see it as a manifestation or connected to the one, not your one is connected to the one, and everybody else's distinct one or many is connected to the one. So similarly, this name is a similar type of thing. Bahu-rūpiṇī. She's taken all these different forms, as mentioned. There's another thing, is she's taken not just forms of Kālī, Durga, Saraswati, Krishna, Rama, Jesus, Buddha, like that. What about all these forms? Bahu-rūpiṇī means she's taken the form of you, and of this, and of that, and of this, right? And of him, and her, and them, right? And that, and so her bahu-rūpiṇī, she's taken, and that's also one of the sub ideas of the text. How the one, I told you how the one or the none has become everything, right? Therefore, how from the Śuddhā ocean of pure Shuddha sattva, as we started with, through the Taraṇginī, the waves of that come in, how she expresses. What does she express as? As everything, as all names, all forms, bahu-rūpiṇī, right? Bhaskaracharya, who is a very famous commentator on the Sahasranāma in the Shiva tradition, says, he quotes on talking about this bahu-rūpiṇī in his commentary. The universe is seen to be manifold. The universe we see appears to be many, variegated. We see differences, and she is everywhere. Sarvamai in the previous name, right? Thus, because of the multiplicity of her forms, meaning everything we see, Shiva, the Divine Mother, is known as bahu-rūpiṇī, right? She's known as this because not just she's become the different goddesses or different gods or different avatars and saints, she's the one that's become everything. So that bahu-rūpiṇī is a beautiful, and that's the thing, is like, you know, which form, God was form without form. God, Sri Ramakrishna said, if we were to give a Siddhanta of Sri Ramakrishna, that satisfying all the different perspectives, God, the infinite reality, is infinite, right? That's the nature of the infinite reality. The infinite has infinite, so and therefore has its form. It's with form and formless. Which form? It has infinite forms, both as the infinite forms or as various ishtas and gods and goddesses and conceptions, right? It is personal and impersonal. It is transcendent and immanent, right? And then he'd always add, and many other things besides, because these are just our conceptions. She would say she is way more than that, and has infinite ways of approach. So bahu-rūpiṇī, right? And then I have a few more names. I want to finish this page. Sthūlā, and then actually the two names can go together, sthūlā and sūkṣmā. Right, so so sthūlā means gross and sūkṣmā means subtle. That's a simple definition, right? So you could say, oh, she's both. So you could say, if we say, we have to connect it to bahu-rūpiṇī. And so we take bahu-rūpiṇī in the first way of understanding as the different gods and goddesses. She's taken on all these different forms as listed in this text, as inferred in this text. So some of those forms are very gross and some of those forms are very subtle. We can also say some of those forms are very benign, some of those forms are very fierce, ugra and shanta, like this, right? And you can see some religious conceptions. You know, we think there's some. I mean, some conceptions of God requires like a lifetime of philosophical refinement, even to think the words to get those concepts. You know, they're very subtle ideas, right? And some are pretty tribal, right? And earthy, some ideas that we have about God and attached to community and fear and real simple one-on-one identifications with things, So it could be something that simple, or it could be really. In the Hanuman Chalisa, it says Hanuman takes really big forms and very subtle forms. Sūkṣma-rūpa, right? And a little tiny form. So it could be that variety. But by the second interpretation, she's taken all these forms. That means this could be everything we see. That's all the growth things we see are her. Means growth here means subtle, obvious, easy to grasp, right? Solid, thick, right? Was clearly conceptualized. Another way of thinking, right? Is a growth, and then subtle is not just like microscopic and tiny. Subtle means very refined. In the Brahmas, in our previous talks also we mentioned a lot of her name. One of her names is that Achinta and Chinta. She's both conceivable and inconceivable, right? And so Chinta. And so sometimes we say, you can't speak about God. You can't speak about realization. It's ineffable, right? Unspeakable, inconceivable. But the Upanishads don't say that, actually, right? That's Sri Ramakrishna, and saints like Sri Ramakrishna use that. Mystics of all traditions say that, and then they say, we can't speak about God, and then they spend the whole life speaking about God, right? Trying to shit like that. It's not but Shankaracharya writes, and on Upanishadic verses that state that God is Brahman. Let's use the proper philosophical. Brahman is very subtle, and cannot be grasped by the gross mind, but it can be grasped by the subtle mind. Therefore, the training and meditation and reasoning, in careful analysis, in purifying the chitta, all the different things in yoga and Vedanta and other things. Different traditions will define the process different, but making the mind subtler and subtler and subtler, that the subtlest of the subtle can be grasped, right? Usually we use the language, it's beyond language, or the beyond grasping. But she is the most subtle. But when we see the gross world, the external world, right, we're also grasping her. We're grasping Brahman. This is only Brahman. This is only her. Right, we don't always see it, but we can. We can train ourselves to see her in this, or like that, and we can train ourselves to see her in the most subtle. Right. There's a thing also. It inspired me when I was just organizing, when I was typing out the verse, right, about the sthūlā and sūkṣmā. In Vedantic training, right? Because a lot of us have a background of kind of Vedantic orientation. Although we have a background, we have no training actually in Vedanta. We have a background in Vedanta. But if we were to be trained in Vedanta, and I don't suggest that it's really hard, but if we were to be trained in Vedanta, I'm joking. I don't know who's watching. I may get in trouble for these things. We love Vedanta, really. We're trained, like, for instance, we're trained to notice the difference. I'm forgetting there's terms for all these, between the subject and the object, right? That's a common thing, right? So we say, so Brahman is the subject, and Maya, or the external world, is the object. And so we see see the distinction between the object and the subject, and we see I'm the thinker, not the thought. Right, I'm the observer, not the observed. I'm the experiencer, not the experience. The subject-object relation is very important. And there's a discipline that's kind of the neti idea, right? And then hopefully we rest hopefully in the subject. We have projective consciousness, which is one of the definitions of Brahman, right? This pure subjective awareness. Another thing we're taught is to see the difference between the temporary and the changing. Right, so we see what is it? Everything we see is changing, and the truth has to be unchanging. So then we look at our mind. The mind's also changing. The truth is unchanging. We look at the ego. The ego's changing. We can keep like that and find that distinction till we hopefully rest by the process of negation in the unchanging. We're searching for the unchanging. Another is between the finite and the infinite. Anything we perceive is by nature finite. That's not Brahman. Therefore, it should be let go. Right, we can make this distinction, right? Another is between the gross and the subtle, right? Anything we see so Brahman is the subtle, and Maya is what's experienced as gross. We make that distinction and like that. Now, that is a discipline, not the truth, right? It's a mental. Sri Ramakrishna describes as using, you use if you have a splinter in your hand, you take another splinter and you take out that splinter, and then you throw both away, right? The goal is not that splinter you're using is not somehow another eternally true. It's a temporary thing to get rid of another splinter. So you have some idea, some distinction of this duality and discrimination. This is the vichara of discrimination we always hear about, discernment, discrimination as a Vedantic and yogic discipline. We use a type of thinking to overcome wrong thinking, right? But in the Shakta Advaita tradition, right, that this text and this temple comes, and Sri Ramakrishna, I believe, comes out of, the non-dualism of the Shakta tradition is a little different. And though that discipline is still there, that these disciplines between the subtle and the gross, the temporary and the changing, the infinite and the finite, the observerum, the observed, thinker and the thought, all the type of things, these are all important as techniques, right? But the truth is not the observer and not the observed, right? It's like so the observer is real and the observer, of course, some would say the observed is not real. It's complete Maya in the classical Advaitic sense is literally non-existent. That we wouldn't hold, right? Bahu-rūpiṇī, she's become all these forms, gross and subtle, right? So she's the thinker and the thought, and the process of thinking. She's the gross and the subtle, and everything in between these two stages. She's the eternal and the temporary, right? The transcendent and the immanent. She's the infinite and the finite. And actually, the principle we've been last few days. A friend of mine is giving a course in subtle. Esoteric symbolism, and part of the reading for his discussion was a hermetical text on the law of polarity. This an ancient principle. And Swamiji uses this language a lot. Swami Vivekananda uses this language a lot. That when he says, "Oh, we don't go from untruth to truth, we go from lower truth to higher truth." As he makes that statement, that he's using this principle that when you have two poles, the poles are not different things. They're two extremes of the same thing, right? And so they're one thing, right? It just maybe a pitch or vibration or temperature of that thing. Like between heat and cold are not two different things, right? They're it's like 0 degrees and 100 degrees are very different. So you can tell what you say one cold, one's hot. 0 degrees and 1 degrees, you can say one's cold and one's hot. You can say 99 degrees and 100 degrees. One's cold and one's hot. I mean, it's always all our sensitive duality and distinction are going to be in that continuum. They're on the same thing. So same thing between thinker and thought, subtle and gross, object and subject. These are two things of the same thing. One is, she's become sthūlā and sūkṣmā. That's to use in these lines. Because actually these are two names, but they could be one name, sthūlā sūkṣmā. Maybe, I mentioned before, Sahasranāma has a tradition of how the names are split. Kālī Sahasranāma doesn't. And so we can split them. Who knows what the original name by name version was, right? Sthūlā sūkṣmā could be one name. She who is both subtle and gross. Or she who's subtle, she who's gross. We'll be taking them as two names, right? Right. She is, and so what does that mean? When you say that she's the object and the subject, the thinker and the thought, then that means she's a substratum that's both, that contains, or that it is, she's, between wave and ocean, there's water, right? She's water, she's wave and she's ocean, and she's water. This thing that both wave and ocean are, something like that, right? Sūkṣma-tarā. She who, now here's like, so sūkṣma, sthūlā, sūkṣma, sūkṣma-tarā. This progression I think is important. Sūkṣma-tarā, she Tara again using the previous language of Tarun, what is it? Sorry, I have to, Lakini, Taraṇginī, something similar, to Taraṇginī. Tara, same type of root. And that means that she's the wave of the subtle, right? So this is interesting. This could be interpreted as that she's the gross and the subtle, she's the subtlest, she's the subtle wave that creates the subtle grosser into bahu-rūpiṇī, into all names and all forms into this world, right? I keep losing sorry. I'm using a new program here that I'm not expert at. And I will end with this name. I was hoping to move further, but I think I'm going to. She was the subtle way. Some have interpreted this Mataji here. Let me see how she. The divine spirit manifests itself as the subtlest element beyond human mental approach. Sūkṣma-tarā. And she's beyond. She's subtle and she's beyond subtle. She's from where the subtle comes. So that's what would be that we would consider like the substratum, right? Like beyond, also, it's and also back to the original Taraṇginī is this waves coming back and forth. Is how she becomes every experience, every manifestation from the most subtle. She's a substratum of subtle and gross of every form. Experienced this way. The next names, which I was hoping to do, but I'm definitely not going to. I have 4 minutes, and I can give a whole class on the next name on Bhagavati. That's too important, right? This is one I actually have several pages of notes, which I really rarely have, right? I usually talk mostly off the top of my head, but so we know Bhagavan means. Maybe you know what Bhagavan means. I bet you don't. We'll talk about what Bhagavan actually means, what you think it means, what actually Bhagavan. But then her name, I like this name for the goddess, Bhagavati. Right, Bhagavati, and a certain so we can. I won't go. Once I start, I'm going to be 4 minutes into it, right? And then the final name, I'll just to tempt you, Anurāgiṇī, and this is very beautiful. In this verse, Anurag means the passionate devotion, right? She who is or dances or moves in this Anurag. Sri Ramakrishna liked this word also. He described that Anurag Bhag, the tiger of passion, of ever new passion for God. That's what's required. So we'll go into that next week, God willing. Anyways, I think we covered a bunch of names. We're moving quickly through these names now. And the previous things some of the names lended to big themes, and we spent a lot of time on the themes. Now I think we're moving at a sprightly pace. Are there any questions or comments? Ma. Oh, good. That's way better. Thank you for your kind attention. And unprecedented, I'm 3 minutes early. According to my countdown clock, I'm 1 minute and 7 seconds early. Could I set myself up a little bit? Jai Ma Kālī, Jai Thakur.